The Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa has concluded its constitutional obligation for this election cycle. They have delivered some 813 names to the Constitutional Court, represented in this case by Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng. Among the panelists were IEC Chairperson Mr. Mashinini, the Acting Secretary of Parliament, Ms. Baby Kyawa, as well as the Chair of the National Council of Provinces, Thandi Modise, who could not help but emphasize the strategic role that is played by her particular arm of state, the NCOP.
It is a house that represents the provinces. So that is the second reason why I will be here, because as the provinces and the provincial speakers are here, we do keep a keen eye on what goes on in the provinces. We guide, we help where we need to do. In fact, I keep on saying to South Africans, the upper house of South Africa, the NCOP, is more strategic than it has been given. It is the house that is uppermost in intergovernmental relations. It regulates, it mediates. So far as Chief Justice, it has not been able to flex the muscle it has, especially around Section 100 and 139. Hopefully in the future, it will be the house that makes South Africa proud, because it has those powers which the National Assembly does not have.
But it was the effervescent Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng that, as he usually does, stole the show. Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng could not help but lament some of the mistakes of the past and urge citizens to hold politicians to a higher account. A man who seemed very much aware of South Africa's constitutional obligations, and that is of addressing mistakes of the past and trying to create an inclusive society.
It's of cardinal importance that the unresolved issues that constitute an integral part of those injustices of the past that we must recognize at all times receive urgent attention. We over-celebrate the power we have. We're too protective of our positions, and some possibly get tempted to use state resources for purposes they were never intended for. Let's sharpen our focus on what matters the most. For those in my village and any other village, for those in townships, because injustice is unsustainable.
It will be Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng who will have to administer an oath of office to some of the people who've been found rather lacking in their integrity as office bearers. And I asked the Chief Justice how that makes him feel, and if he thinks there's something we can do about that.
Am I not ashamed? Well, there is a role that ought to be played by others. That is why there is separation of powers in South Africa. The judiciary can't do everything. Our responsibility is simply to check whether the minimum requirements that have to be met for a person to be sworn in or have an oath administered to him or her as a member of parliament or as a member of the provincial legislature have been met. Beyond that is the responsibility of another person. So I'm not ashamed that in the execution of my responsibilities, I do them exactly the way I'm required to do them. I can't do the responsibility of political parties. They must clean up their own act to the extent that there may be some cleaning up that is necessary. Structures that exist, including political parties, owe it to those who vote for them to serve them only through the best. And it is those who vote who ought to bring pressure to bear on those that identify their public representatives. Now, the structure that exists maybe calls for review, but it is for South Africans to say, what is the best way of identifying people who can represent us in government? What is the most effective way? Let me explain myself. In other jurisdictions, in other nations, a person does get to stand before the electorate to say, I'm so and so, I'm running for this or the other office, whether parliament or provincial legislature. And the public get to say, but we know you. This is who you are. How dare you even suggest that you have what it takes to represent us? People get to challenge the capacity and the credibility of those who ought to represent them in public office. And maybe the South African public ought to begin to reflect on whether it is something that should be factored into our electoral system going forward.